When I first made this channel, Sable was one of the games I wanted to talk about on it. I remember finding it one lazy rainy Sunday. I had about 100 chores or other things that I should have been doing, but I was bored and struggling with depression and a severe lack of motivation and wasn't really feeling like doing much of anything at that time. So I decided to browse the Xbox Indie Store for a while, and in so doing, I discovered Sable, sitting in its own little corner of the Xbox market just minding its own business until I stumbled on it. Since then, I've tried a few different times to write a script to talk about this game, and each time I find myself becoming a little bit stumped or twisting myself into literary knots trying to explain this game and what it means. The problem is that Sable is a bit of an open-ended question to the player, with the question being, where do you belong in this world? And the time you spend playing the game becoming your very long-winded and somewhat rambling answer. Because of this, and because of things that will become apparent as we continue on, a normal review of Sable is tricky, at least to someone like me who likes things neat and tidy and in their own little categories. Now yes, I will dissect this game like I have done to others on my channel, cutting out the plot, the music, the mechanics, and laying them out for all to see and judge. But doing so, I feel, does diminish in some way what Sable has to offer, because if I'm speaking strictly from an analytical point of view, then Sable is just another very short indie open-world exploration game that, if I'm honest, doesn't give the player much to do beyond a few specific activities and quests, and really struggles with being fun by what modern convention says should be fun. And yet, Sable is so much more than that. It's a game about finding yourself and your place in a world that is so much bigger than you. It's a game about taking to the open dunes and the far-off cities and exploring for the sake of simply wanting to see what's over the next hill. It's a game where lazily drifting over the sands of the desert planet is just as important as climbing and puzzling your way through some 1,000-year-old crashed spaceship, with your reward at the end being a scrap of audio explaining how this piece of space debris came to sit here on this planet. In many ways, Sable is like a dream. Visually, its aesthetic draws heavily, and almost exclusively, from the artist Jean Girard, who is more commonly known by the artistic name Mobius. While the game's music was written and performed by an American indie rock band called Japanese Breakfast, and possesses an almost lo-fi quality to it, filled with ambient tracks that work to enhance the environments the players will find themselves gliding through on their journey. Michelle Zauer, the band's lead singer, has even gone on record as saying the song Better the Mask is her favorite song that she's ever written as an artist. And Sable is a game I've wanted to talk about for a very long time now. So I invite you to join me as we climb on our bikes and take to the open deserts of Medan, in our own journey of exploration and self-discovery. Please also keep in mind that I am by no means an expert in any of the subjects I discuss in this video, and that if you have opinions that differ from mine, that is okay. Sable starts out simple enough, with the player assuming the role of a young teenage girl on the eve of a coming-of-age ritual that is called the gliding. The game starts out by teaching you the basics, how to move, jump, and crouch. The game also teaches you how to climb, something that you can do on pretty much any surface for as long as you want, provided you have enough stamina. Completing the tutorial has us exiting the ruined temple we have been exploring and emerging into the windswept sands of Ewer Valley, the home of our clan, the Ibex. Mechanically, we have free reign to go anywhere within the valley, though doing so on foot is a slow and very time-consuming process. So naturally, we're directed to the nearby Ibex camp and introduced to a few characters. Jedi, our grandmother/guardian figure, who upon speaking with us gives us a chance to voice how we feel about our upcoming coming-of-age ritual, as well as our general attitude in the world. Hilal, who is a big brother or possibly boy-next-door type character, gives us a glidestone and directs us to a temple off in the distance for us to visit and empower the stone at. And Driss, the Ibex camp leader, who kind of forgot that today was our gliding, but makes up for it by directing us to a battered and old bike and tells us to take it out for a spin and to come back when we are ready. The bike he gives us is called a sand cutter, a funny name since it's pretty slow, maneuvers like a log, and in general looks like it might fall apart at any time. But it does allow us to move a lot faster than walking. Taking the sand cutter, we're turned loose in our little valley and given unlimited time to explore and get used to the game's controls. Exploring the valley does yield a few valuables, as there are these seemingly wooden shipwrecks scattered around, that often have within them a chest or a pot that contains some money for us to spend later on. Also, on occasion, we can find these odd little egg things that go through this increasingly annoying animation whenever we pick them up, which again will become relevant later on in the game. For now, I decide to head to the temple that Hilal mentioned, since getting there now won't take half an hour of walking like it would have before. To get to the temple, I have to climb up a few hills to reach the entrance before the floor falls out from under me and I'm forced to make my way through a short valley sequence. Reaching the inner temple, the glidestone we've been given starts to glow and charge with power, and after a pretty light show and a bright flash, we find ourselves on a powered lift being taken to the very top of the temple complex. From here, we're taught how to glide. That is, if we jump off pretty much anything and hold the jump button, a glowing sphere of energy surrounds us and allows us to fall slowly in any direction we choose for as long as we want. With our newfound ability, we're able to hop from platform to platform, and after deterring for a moment to snag another chest, we exit the temple and start to make our way back to the tribe. Reporting our newfound gliding abilities to Hilal, our clanmate, has him excitedly directing us to speak with Sizzo, while lamenting that he's a bit jealous we're about to experience the freedom of our gliding. To cheer him up, I promise to throw myself off 1,000 cliffs just for him, before scampering off to speak with Sizzo. She's the clan's mechanic, and when we talk to her about our special day, she tasks us with going out and finding the parts needed to make our bike rather than waiting for Driss to gift them to us, as is tradition. After being directed to 3 locations around the valley, we return to the sand cutter and start to collect the pieces needed to build our bike. The control chip, it turns out, is not in the ship fragment we were directed to, as the little kid from the tribe has stolen it and is hiding it from us until we capture 5 large beetles from a nearby oasis. Alternatively, some snooping around the camp can have us actually uncovering the control chip if we're not interested in being exploited by a child. The power bank is at the very top of an old tower and requires us to climb and platform our way up before jumping off and floating gently all the way back down. The final piece of the bike is located in an ancient dried-up reservoir that we can only access after we've opened the ancient dam spill gates. Also, if the player is willing to spend about 15 minutes wandering around in this little canyon, you can also come away with another one of those choom eggs and some more cash, which is worth it if you ask me. With all the required pieces in hand, we return to the Ibex camp and to Sizzo, who takes us to her garage and shows us how all the parts fit together to form our very own bike, which she names Simoon. Little tangent here, but she says that the bike is supposed to be named by the owner, but she never actually asks us what we want to call our bike, so I'm not sure if that's just an oversight in the writing, or if they did that for simplicity's sake. With those things completed, the final ritual in our gliding begins. Jedi directs us to the very temple we started the game in, and the strange face door that we saw earlier. Now it will open for us. And sure enough, as we approach it, it opens, revealing a large ceremonial chamber with a large statue in the middle, which begins to glow as 3 platforms with buttons hover in the air around it. Making our way around the room isn't hard, and I even managed to snag some more money as we hit all 3 platforms, which causes a mask to form around the statue. Once the mask is complete, a mask of our own appears on a pedestal at the foot of the great statue. Though I can't help but notice that the mask we get does not match the mask that we built for the statue. With our new mask equipped, we look a little bit like a devil because of our horns, but we make our way back to the camp only to find it empty and deserted. Listening to a message that's been left for us reveals that the very last step of the gliding must be taken alone. And with that, and a few final words of advice from Jedi, we're set free and allowed to leave the valley that we have called home for 16 years. On the way out, I decide to drive Simoon through the ring I had been asked to drive the sandcutter bike through earlier. It just felt right, like a kind of passing of the torch. As we pass between the 2 ancient statues that guard the entrance to the valley, music starts to play and we're shown a wide shot of the world beyond. Our adventure has officially begun. When it comes to Sable's open world, I find myself torn on how I feel about it. On one hand, visually, it's a spectacle to behold. Gliding across the seemingly endless dunes or weaving between the trees of the jungle region, or else trying to catch as much air as you can off a large hill or mountain, there is no denying that the environments of Sable are beautiful to look at. On the other hand, each region is rather barren with only a few scattered points of interest and usually only 2 or 3 quests to complete for that region, though 1 or 2 regions do have more quests than the others. When it comes to the open world, in my experience, there seems to be 2 mindsets on how to utilize them effectively. Mindset number 1 is what I like to call the Bethesda/Activision approach, which is to build an open world and then populate it with things to do to keep the player busy. This usually leads to numerous scattered quests and locations, points of interest, and anything and everything to keep the player walking and climbing over that next hill for as long as possible. The second approach is what I call the No Man's Sky approach, which involves generating a large open world for the player to experience and then sprinkling a few points of interest nearby, but not exactly telling the player where those points of interest are, or else giving them a very vague hint as to their location, but not an exact waypoint. That way, if the player is enjoying their time with the open world, they will be motivated to spend their time looking for these points of interest. The catch is that along the way, most methods offer additional ways of interacting with the world during that travel time, usually in the form of random encounters, encounters with enemies that result in combat, the gathering of various components for crafting, and/or other events that help flesh out the world. Sable has almost none of these, though on occasion the player may find a choom egg or a butterfly out in the world that they can collect and later sell. Simply put, Sable's open world feels empty, with the few points of interest being spaced far enough apart that it will take actual minutes of real-world travel time to reach them. In some ways, this plays into the idea of isolation and self-discovery the game wants you to engage with as you play. But there is a limit to how long a player can do so before their mind starts to wander in a bad way, and they become bored. It leaves the part of my brain that craves a structured action and reward system wanting in a painful way. Overall, while I don't think Sable's open world is bad by design, I do think it could use some refinement. Perhaps by adding a few more points of interest or else adding some random encounters. These could go a long way to keeping the player engaged in a more traditional sense without violating the game's own setting and goals. No 2 playthroughs of Sable will be alike. Despite having the same points of interest in the same map, players will prioritize things differently and therefore will experience the game in different ways. Some players might prioritize the collecting of new bike parts and therefore will head off in a nearly straight line towards the map's various clan camps and the merchants contained within. Others might take a more wandering approach and spend time exploring the game's ruins and points of interests. Other players will no doubt be interested in the game's background lore and may find themselves spending hours platforming and puzzling their way through ancient spaceship hulks, looking for clues. Each person will experience the game in their own special way. For my own adventure with Sable, I decided I wanted to focus on Simoon and find all the coolest parts I could for her. But to do that, I'd need money. So after leaving the valley, I spent most of my time wandering around a few ruins, collecting items and what money I could find, before then making my way to the nearest outpost, though not before running into an angler man who taught me how to fish in the sands of Medan, another potential source of income if I have the patience for it. Burnt Oak Outpost was small and had some interesting bike parts, but nothing I couldn't live without. Still, I decided to stick around for a bit and ended up chatting with the local innkeeper who gave me a task to find some beetle larvae, no thank you, and also talked with a local scrap dealer who said he'd pay me for any scrap I could bring to him. Alrighty. From there, I drifted around for a bit, stumbling upon the Queen Choom and helping her to recollect some of her scattered eggs in exchange for a boost to my stamina. Yes, please. And additionally, with a promise to keep my eyes open for any more I may come across in my journeys. One thing that definitely sets Sable apart from other games is its complete lack of anything resembling combat. Simply put, it does not exist, and the player will never find themselves in anything resembling a combat encounter. When I first played Sable, I was a bit taken aback by this, but after spending hours zooming over the dunes of Medan and exploring its ruins, I struggled to decide if combat would have made this game more memorable or enjoyable. To some people, this is one of the main appeals of the game, as it eliminates any sort of skill-based necessity within gameplay, leaving nearly everything up to the player and their own willingness to explore or seek out the game's secrets. To others, this lack of combat or any kind of antagonist system only makes the game world feel even more empty than it already is. Traditionally, many games use combat as a way to break up the time a player would spend traveling, and provide a momentary distraction that rewards the player if they do well. This can help break up the monotony and tedium of traveling long distances, provided the encounter rate isn't too aggressive. Way back when I first started playing Sable, I actually made a Reddit post about how I was curious if others were bothered or fond of the lack of combat in the game. In response, I got dozens of passionate and extremely adamant responses, with many of them saying the lack of combat is what drew them to this game in the first place. For some, it was even a place to start out for their kids, a game that doesn't have combat and therefore is more child-friendly. For others, combat would make the game a chore, something they'd have to learn and get good at to enjoy. In some ways, I perfectly understand this. There are times in my life when I just want to throw something on and lose myself in it, when I want to zone out and just enjoy a game for the sake of gaming or to just relax and zone out. Usually when I reach for No Man's Sky or more recently Wilder Myth, or basically any game where failure means nothing and I can just kill time. In the end, the lack of combat is something the player will need to decide for themselves how they feel about. Me personally, for as much as I enjoy Sable, I feel like some form of combat or antagonism might have given the player a bit more to experience in the game. But I also understand that this could potentially distract from the finding yourself nature of the game. From there, I decided I was close enough to the border of the next region that I might as well head over it and see what awaited me in the Badlands region. As it turns out, a lot of climbing. The entire region is dominated by these large sand and stone pillars that the user has to climb to the top of in order to locate the region's cartographer and outpost. Locating the cartographer was pretty easy, but it took me a while to figure out how to reach the city off in the distance. But I did eventually figure it out, and although I found the city and its gliding parts to be pretty wanting, I did snag some new clothes for my effort. Done with the city, I turned my attention to the open dunes, and after puttering around for a while, I not only completed another ring puzzle, but also spent some time working my way through the crashed spaceship, earning myself a tiny tidbit of lore about the game and how things came to be. After that, I decided to head even further south, and found myself in the Hako region of Medan. Here, the landscape is full of tall hills that are hard to glide over, and scooped out like valleys that have a surprising amount of plant life in them. After plundering another spaceship wreck, I noticed something I'd never seen before off in the distance. A floating city? Again, it took me a while to figure out how to reach this city, but when I did, I found it oddly abandoned, though I did snag a few collectible items from it. I decided to continue heading south, and as I reached the very edge of the map, I came across an encampment of crystal farmers, something Jedi had mentioned before but refused to elaborate on. Turns out, these crystal farmers live around this plateau that, at the very center, has a massive lightning storm that eternally rages. At the top of the plateau, there are these kinds of floating pillars that, when struck, grow these specialized lightning crystals, which I would imagine are used in the manufacturing of power cores and other bits of technology. Climbing my way up to the plateau, I snag a few of these crystals and also take a moment to buy the crystal farmer's outfit before heading north to find the actual region camp. Here, the camp leader tries to get me to go on another quest involving bugs. Again, no thank you. And the camp mechanic wants some lightning crystals, which I just so happen to have. Handing them over allows me to buy some sweet bike parts that basically supercharge my bike and let me race through the desert on my way to my next adventure. For as much praise as I've given Sable so far, there are some issues that I need to address that unfortunately do drag this game down a bit. I'm not sure if it's due to the game not being optimized very well, or if it's just that games like this are naturally kinda janky, but there are some pretty glaring technical issues that can affect the game at any given time. Sadly, in a post on Twitter, Shedworks has reported that there are no plans to patch the game and fix any of these outstanding issues that currently plague the game. PlayStation gamers have it by far the worst, where a persistent memory leak will cause the game's quality and stability to constantly diminish the longer the player plays the game. On Reddit, some players report that within 90 minutes the game is almost unplayable, with frame rate drops, input lag, and visual bugs. Luckily, like with most memory leaks, closing and restarting the game fixes the issue, albeit only temporarily. And although I could not find much information about the Xbox version of the game, I do suspect that it too suffers from a leak issue, as I routinely noticed my game performing worse the longer I was playing. In fact, frame rate drops seem to be the most common issue with Sable, as things like maneuvering the camera to look directly at the player while they move can trigger the game to start stuttering and dropping frames. As can looking directly at your glider as it moves, looking at a wide open range of area, and looking at an area with too many moving textures. If you're sensitive to dropped frames, if they make you nauseous or give you headaches, I might recommend skipping this game, or else playing in very small doses. Our bike Simoon will occasionally glitch out too, possibly due to catching on the environment where her wings will dip down into the sand in unusual ways. Other times, if you hit a rock or stone just right, she'll bounce and jostle in strange ways, requiring the player to either come to a complete stop to regain control, or else get off the bike entirely. Lastly, and this is less of a bug and more of a sound mixing issue I feel, but there are times when the soundscape of this game can be almost overwhelming, especially if the player is walking on a stone surface. The constant sound of Sable's shoes remind me of that annoyingly high-pitched, smacking, squishing sound of flip-flops. But combine this with the sound of the wind rustling through the ruins, leaves rustling, birds and beetles calling to each other, and the occasional grunt or sound from Sable herself as she climbs something, and it can all combine to become a bit much. Several times, I found myself actually muting this game just to recover and have some peace and quiet. Also, some of the bike parts make really strange sounds that were really off-putting to me, and I wish could have been changed or tweaked. Overall, I cannot call Sable a stable game by any means, but I didn't have any issues with hard crashing while I played. That being said, the confirmed lack of future patches and fixes for the game's current outstanding issues is a major bummer, and is unfortunately a detriment to this game in the long run. I decide to keep going north, and eventually I find myself dwarfed by the largest wreck I've come across so far. It's called the Whale, and as we'll find out later, it's the mothership for the fleet that came to Medan all those many unknown years ago. The wreck is so big that I can actually drive my bike into it, and I spend about an hour puzzling out its secrets, collecting scrap metal and chum-eggs, as well as unlocking the wreck's central mainframe, which teases me with a fancy bike if I can complete the remaining wrecks out in the desert. With my spoils in hand, I depart the Whale and continue my way through the Red Sea region, which is home to the largest city in the game world, the city of Erkria. After so long dealing with small outposts and villages, a true city is a welcome sight, even if things aren't going so well when I arrive, as stepping through the gates sees me entering a cutscene where I witness a guard trying to reassure residents of the city during a mysterious power outage. As I stand there, another guard waves me down and asks for help investigating what is happening. He directs me to take an old broken power core to the city's mechanist so it can be charged and restored, while at the same time chatting with the mechanist about who could be responsible for this outage. Of course, nothing is simple in these kinds of investigations, as when I arrive at the mechanist's shop, I find it completely trashed. Handing over the power core, I asked what happened, and the mechanist says I was robbed. Asking follow-up questions has the mechanist blaming a merchant named Ira, who he claims has been steadily raising prices and making a fortune ever since the power went out, while everyone else struggles just to survive. I decide to go speak with this merchant Ira, and after bribing her guard with 100 shins, I find myself standing before the merchant queen herself. She is definitely not happy to see me or answer any of my questions. She laments at how it took time and effort to acquire her goods to sell, and that she doesn't understand why people think she should just give them away since the lights are not turned on. Additionally, she points the finger at a well-known criminal that lives within the city and points out that he is more likely to have taken the core than her, since he is a criminal after all. Finding and speaking with this criminal has him all but admitting that he does have the skills to pull off such a heist, but that he wouldn't do so just for himself. Someone would have to hire him and provide him with additional tools required, which spins the blame back on either the merchant or the mechanist. It's at this time that a runner comes to us and lets us know that the power core is charged and ready, and after picking it up from the mechanist's shop, we're instructed to go to the nearby power station and install the new core. To find this station, we have to follow a partially buried cable in the sands for quite a ways before spotting the structure off in the distance and making a beeline for it. Once inside, we do have to solve a few environmental route puzzles to get into the reactor chamber, and in so doing, we find some important clues. 1. There is broken glass on the inside of the reactor, meaning someone broke it to get in and therefore did not have a key. 2. Some feathers left at the scene match the birds the merchant had in her office. And 3. The core was removed with expert skill so as not to damage it, something a mechanist would certainly have the skills to do. With that in mind, and after having installed the backup core, we hurry back to the city and the guard who hired us to review what we know and decide who is guilty. I've read that there is no actual right or wrong answer for this quest, but in my mind, I think it's pretty clear that the criminal was the one who actually stole the core, but that he was hired to do so by the merchant. However, when I tell the guard my suspicions, he becomes nervous and says we don't have enough evidence to reasonably arrest the merchant era. I guess on Medan, the rich can get away with anything too. More than a little annoyed, I spend more time wandering around the city, and in so doing encounter a beggar man with a problem. His son, it turns out, was caught trying to steal water, something the city guard controls very strictly, though as the beggar man tells it, it takes days to get their allotment of rationed water since they're just beggars, and many of them are currently dying of thirst. The man asks if I've ever heard of the Shade, who was a kind of mysterious vigilante in the city some time ago. It turns out this ragged old beggar man used to be the Shade, but he retired when he found a new purpose in the city, taking care of the many orphans who live there. He asks us to follow the trail he left behind and to find the Shade's old mask so that we may become the Shade and free his son from jail. Of course I agree, and soon enough I'm wandering the city following a trail set out with obscure bits of graffiti on the walls, ceilings, and floors. It takes me about 15 minutes, but I do end up finding the mask, and after bringing it back, the old man tells me where his son is being held and that I should wait for dark to strike. Thus begins a kind of interactive cutscene, where we see the guards guarding the cell talking to one another, before I decide to give them some psychological torment worthy of a horror film. Also, small tangent here, but can I just say, this shot right here, god damn is it a great shot. Kudos to whoever animated and designed this, because it is seriously top-notch. Releasing the child, we return to the old man who tells me to keep the mask and that I am a worthy heir to the Shade legacy. It occurs to me around this time that I was running low on cash, but that I had a ton of scrap to turn in. So a quick 5-minute journey later, and I'm pulling into the scrap dealer at the Burnt Oak Outpost. He pays me a whopping 1,600 shins for all my scrap and also hands over 3 scrapper badges. And it's here that something else occurs to me. I've not turned in any of the badges that I've been collecting as rewards for some of my side questing. And there just so happens to be a mask caster right here at the outpost. As it turns out, you need 3 badges to unlock a mask, and so far I've unlocked a total of 3 masks: the Mechanist mask, the Merchant mask, and the Scrapper mask. If I'm being honest, of these 3 masks, the Mechanist mask appeals to me the most, since I've spent most of my time in-game searching for valuable bike parts, and I like their general philosophy that technology is meant to help people, but can also be dangerous in untrained hands. In fact, I feel comfortable saying that as of right now, unless some other faction bursts into the game and sweeps me off my feet, I'll probably choose to be a mechanist when the time comes for that kind of choice. Although it's not important to the story of the game, Sable does have background lore as to how things got the way they are on Medan. Audio logs and environmental storytelling tell a story of exploration, tragedy, a refusal to give up, and the hardiness of the human spirit. If I'm being honest, in the several times I've played Sable, I hardly ever bother finding all the terminals and audio logs that piece together the history of the world and what happened to it. Luckily for me, others have done that work for me, and I can learn the lore of the world and the planet as I explore just by listening to a few videos here on YouTube. The lore of Sable starts an unknown amount of time ago, with a fleet of ships traveling through space looking for a planet to call home. We can infer from recordings found in various ship ruins scattered around Medan that the fleet has been traveling for a while and their search has not been going well. As, when they enter the current system, their biggest concern is with dumping their drive cores to prevent a kind of meltdown from occurring, which apparently is something that can only be done planet-side. So after scanning the planets in the system, the fleet selects Medan and begins to approach the planet with the goal of dumping their drive cores there. But as they draw closer, they encounter a strange alien signal coming from the surface. This signal they name the Perpetual, and although it is undeniably there, the fleet cannot figure out what the signal is meant for, what it does, or who is sending it. But with the situation critical and no time to find a new planet to dump their spent drive cores, the fleet decides it would continue their plan to dump the cores on Medan and then attempt to figure out the Perpetual signal later. The Perpetual, sensing their intentions, sends out a different kind of signal, one that hijacks and incapacitates their ships, causing them to crash onto the planet at various locations. Stuck in a critical situation, the fleet ends up dumping their drive cores and are then forced to shelter within the ruins of their crashed ships, as the radiation from their dumped and spent cores cause a massive environmental apocalypse that causes the death of much of the planet's plant and fauna. During this time, the only way for the people to survive on the planet's surface is to wear environmental suits, breather masks, and to get around on faster-than-foot hoverbikes, which the crew of the various ships are able to cobble and piece together using debris and surplus parts. Around this time, the various isolated groups begin to develop their own traditions and styles, including the unique masks that are worn when they would travel from one wreck to another to visit and exchange goods. Although it is unknown how long this period of time lasted, we do know that eventually the radiation levels dropped low enough to be at first tolerable and then eventually safe enough for the now tribes of Medan to leave their ancestral shipwrecks and start to spread out across the planet's surface, and thus begin the modern era, with the events of our adventure with Sable taking place again an unknown amount of time after this. There's 2 more regions to explore before I have to make my final decision, so I decide to head to the northeastern region known as the Sodic Wastes. And after skirting around a small mountain range, I find myself in the Shipyard, which is less of a crash site and more of a junkyard of broken and weathered ship parts. My frame rate drops pretty badly in here, so much so that I actually start to get a bit of a headache by the time I've completed the climbing puzzle to talk to the cartographer, who's camped up at the very top of this tower. Grabbing the area map, I consult it and quickly find all the points of interest, though there isn't really anything super amazing or jaw-dropping in this region if I'm being honest. I did stumble upon a trail of statues that led me to a famous poet and storyteller, who I spend some time talking with and debating the meaning of freedom and life and our pursuit of happiness. Also, as it turns out in my journeys, I had picked up a quest to ask around and find this very poet, so I was able to turn that in for a small reward and a badge to the Atomic Heart Group, which seems to be some kind of religious order, but that's about as much as I ever ended up figuring out about them. Sable's soundtrack has a very strong lo-fi quality to it, with soothing tones and words that seem to float on a kind of orchestral wind, when they are spoken words at all. At times, I don't really know what word is being sung or spoken, but I somehow don't have to, as I know that no matter what they are, they will convey a message of exploration, home, and discovering one's self. I spent a long time listening to Sable's soundtrack, longer than I spend on most soundtracks, honestly. Something about the alien beats and rhythms just kinda tickled my brain in an interesting way. Japanese Breakfast, the composer of the soundtrack, did an excellent job mixing the music to have a kind of familiar yet alien quality to it, while also evoking a mental image with every song. For example, one song is titled The Ewer Day. A kind of rhythmic hooting plays every few seconds, accompanied by a soft wandering whine that reminds me of looking out over the endless horizon while searching for something. While in the background, a soft humming buzz reminds me of the low rumble of machinery. All of which painted a mental image in my mind of someone stuck toiling in a job, but given the chance to look out over the horizon and imagine what it would be like to leave and walk away from their life. Another song called The Beatles' Nest has a bouncy, almost hip-hop vibe to it, with long, drawn-out blows from a horn punctuated by this kind of bubbling and popping beeping sound, and the occasional beat of a deep echoey drum, which is joined by some soft shaking sounds, which really gives the feeling of movement and activity amongst the quiet and stillness of the desert. There is no denying that Sable's soundtrack is definitely unique, leaning at times into a genre I want to call minimalistic science tribalism, while at other times wearing its maker's originals as a Japanese punk band on its sleeve. In addition to the game's soundtrack, a game's soundscape is just as important in setting the game's mood and tone. If the game is playing overly dramatic or melancholic music but showing puppies and rainbows, then it definitely will cause a disconnect. I am happy to say that Sable's use of soundscape is very good. It really leans into the wide open scapes of the open world, while at the same time utilizing the close spaces of the world's ruins, wrecks, and outposts. When you're alone in the desert, you feel alone. Just us, the hum of Simoon's engine, the rustle of the wind over the sand dunes, and the occasional off-in-the-distance bird call. At the same time, ruins feel closed in and cut off from the outside world, the sound of Sable's sandals on the stone flooring mixing with the sound of crumbling rock and mortar. Another sound you'll possibly hear on the regular is a kind of whistling call that Sable can make, which will summon Simoon, her bike, to her if she's in a somewhat nearby location. And if Simoon is nearby, she will let out a kind of response relaying sigh as she turns on and starts to trundle her way towards you. One small detail I found myself smiling at is when the player is running on a metal surface, the sound of their footsteps varies slightly, creating an almost musical song as you run. Overall, I'd say the soundtrack and soundscape of Sable is one of the strongest elements, really nailing the feeling of being on a kind of pilgrimage as you find yourself. Sure, there are a few stumbles and falls, but the same could be said during any adventure. With nowhere else to go, I decide to head to the final region on the map, the Wash. Visually, I don't like this place. While a portion of it is wide open sand dunes, another part of it is full of plants and trees, similar to the previous jungle areas, but they don't have any of the vibrancy or charm, unless you climb above the tree line, in which case everything becomes a sea of oranges and washed out yellows. The cartographer for this region is camped out on top of a mesa, and from the top we can actually see most of the points of interest in the region. After doing a little scouting, I decide to head for this large temple-looking ruin off in the distance. And sure enough, when I reach it, this place is definitely some kind of temple. But it's not a temple to a god, or even a king. Instead, it seems to be some kind of observatory, as it has several large models of the solar system, one of which is actually a pretty complex puzzle that the player can complete to make a door open. Inside is a model of Medan's solar system, where I can ask some questions about the other planets, while also snagging a pair of pants for my growing clothing collection. The region outpost is built into the skeleton of a massive, long-dead creature, and has the basic amenities I've come to expect. Admittedly, I am starting to grow weary of my gliding and of the game, so I don't bother asking around for any quests or rumors. Instead, I look at the local bike part selection, make my choice, and move on when I'm done. Talking to the automated postal system has me getting a message from Jedi, my grandmother, who tells me that the Ibex tribe has returned to their valley and that I am free to come home anytime I wish. And while it's tempting, I decide there are a few side quests I want to wrap up, starting with finding and completing all of the space wreck puzzles. Luckily for me, I've been doing the wrecks pretty much as I find them, and the one that I seem to be missing is near the Burnt Oak Outpost that we have been visiting semi-regularly. So I travel there, turn in my scrap, and glide my way out towards the wreck off in the distance. Small tangent when it comes to these wrecks, I will admit that while they are fun, they make no kind of spatial logic in any way. Like yes, each of them has a control room or a cockpit, which is the final room you can access, but to get there, the player has to make their way through these wide open rooms that require puzzle solving to navigate, which is fine for now when the ship is a crashed wreck, but I can't help but be stumped as to how these things worked when the ships were operational. Yes, it makes sense for the ships to have cargo holds or storage bays, but it seems odd that the cockpit would be right next to them, and for there to be little to no hallways, corridors, or other facilities on board these ships. It's a minor complaint, but one that I can't help but feel each time I'm working my way through another one of these wreck puzzles. Completing the final wreck puzzle gives me all I need to return to the largest wreck, the whale, and talk with its still functioning AI, Sauron. She thanks me for gathering the recordings of what happened when the humans first arrived on Medan, and as a reward, once I have all 6, she gives me the last remaining pre-crash landing spacesuit and a land speeder, which I take with glee. With that, I decide it's time to return home. I may still have several unfinished quests in my journal, but my interest in them is minimal. I've seen all I want to see and done all I've wanted to do. I've unlocked a few masks, but the ones that call to me the most is the Mechanist mask, as finding new bike parts was the main goal of pretty much everything I did. From the Burnt Oak Outpost, it's a short ride to the entrance to the Ibex Valley. As I near the plateau the tribe calls home, I can see smoke rising in the distance from their fires. It's clear some amount of time has passed, as the bratty little girl who tried to extort beetles from me is now a grown girl around the age I was when I started the game. I chat with a few of the clan before being directed to the final ritual of my gliding, the choosing of my mask. To do this, I am directed to the temple where I first got my first mask, representing the Ibex people. Once there, all the masks I've unlocked, about 5 or so, are placed on statues all around the central chamber, and I am asked to choose which one I want. As I mentioned before, the Mechanist mask calls to me the most, so without hesitation I put it on before giving up my gliding stone and ending my gliding. The last shot of the game sees Sable, now an adult in the eyes of her people, herself and her culture, leaving the temple and running off in the direction of the Ibex camp to show everyone her choice in life paths. Fade to black, roll credits. If I'm being honest, Sable is a tricky game for me to talk about. On one hand, I absolutely love its art style and the spirit of what it's doing, creating a setting where the player's own curiosity is the primary driving force to go out and actually explore the world, rather than a series of quest markers telling you that there's something to discover over here if you want. The game's lack of a combat system means that any money the player finds can be used to truly express their own individuality, be it through the outfits they collect or the bike parts they purchase in their journeys, which might not be unique to Sable, but still somehow manages to feel unique. In a way, Sable reminds me of the early release versions of No Man's Sky, when the game lacked a sequential plot and mission system, and was much more about satisfying each individual player's urge to explore with a simple question of what's over the next hill. At the same time, though, Sable definitely has its flaws. While some regions are packed with side quests, others are painfully empty and sparse. The lack of combat, while a boon to some, will definitely be a deterrent to others. And there were definitely times playing this game where I found myself wanting to play a different game, with a more straightforward task and reward structure, rather than having to motivate myself to see what's happening in the next region. The world of Sable is beautiful, but it's also painfully empty, with only a handful of ruins and structures to explore. There are no dynamic events out in the world, and no random encounters with others on their gliding. Yes, there is the odd choom egg to snag, or beetle or butterfly to collect, or point of interest to explore, but the time between these events can be actual real-world minutes at a time, which can make the gameplay feel slow and slightly boring if you are playing for very long periods. The lack of combat, while praised by some, will definitely be seen as a negative to others, as it's just one more tool that the game doesn't use to hold the player's attention. And the lack of any kind of skill-based mechanic leaves the player with less options to grow as a character, which partially conflicts with Sable's message of find yourself and your place in the world. Now, to be clear, I am not saying that Sable is bad, not by any means. In fact, in many ways, I enjoyed my time with Sable. However, Sable is far from perfect, and as a player and a reviewer, I feel the need to be honest about the choices the game has made and their effects on the gameplay. And after playing this game for several hours, the most pronounced effect that those choices had on me left me wanting with more to do. The game says go forth and find your place, And after hours of gameplay, I found what I enjoyed doing most: scouting and wandering around the game's sporadic ruins, searching for outfits or bike parts, or even just the odd random collection of shins. It's just a shame that the opportunities to do so are very rare and limited, and can be exhausted after a couple hours, even if the player isn't being completionist about it. I will also note that most of the ruins are not particularly large or complex, which is a bummer, as I would have liked a Skyrim-sized dungeon using Sable's settings and mechanics. In the end, I feel like Sable is the kind of game that people will enjoy most if they play in small bursts or else in a single setting. That way, a player's motivation can ebb and flow, and they will experience the world with a more natural flow. Approaching the game like an RPG or an adventure game, on the other hand, can only harm the player, as those games utilize the mechanics that Sable does not. In some ways, Sable is a game that seems to defy buzzwords by subverting your expectations with them. The game is open world, but with little to do. The game's biggest mechanic is about customization, which will only ever affect how fast your bike goes or handles. The game is about finding yourself, but lacks any kind of measurable skill system to keep track of the things the player is good at, leaving that decision ultimately up to the player. As I mentioned before, Sable is one of those games that made me want to start this channel, as the longer I played it, the more I found myself talking about it to my friends. I did a lot of thinking as I played Sable, and not just about the game either. As I glided over the dunes and through the jungles, I thought about projects I've been neglecting, friends I haven't spoken to in a while. I thought about stories I wanted to write and D&D games I wanted to play. In a way, it kind of surprised me how much traveling in Sable reminded me of traveling in real life, how your mind wanders and how random thoughts spring up like weeds along the highway. I hesitate to call Sable a great game, but in a twisted kind of way, I also wouldn't call it a bad game either, technical issues aside. To me, Sable is something special and unique. Is it everything I want it to be? Absolutely not. But it's what it wants to be. And what there is enough that by the time I'm done with it, I'm glad for the time I spent roaming the deserts and hills of Medan. In many cultures, journeys such as Sable's gliding were commonplace, a way for a person to find their role in the world and also to experience the world beyond the boundaries of their family or tribe or clan. But with the industrialization and modernization of the world, we've sort of lost the ability to find ourselves, because the society we live in tells us who we should want to be at pretty much every turn. Maybe that's why I find Sable such an interesting and special game, because it calls back to a simpler time when instead of being told what to do, a person was asked, unironically, "What do you want to do?" and then allows the player to explore the world at their own pace and with a level of freedom rarely found in games. To some, Sable will be a short but enjoyable adventure game. To others, it'll be a frustrating and janky experience that will leave them annoyed but hopefully wanting more. To a rare few, it might be a game they spend endless hours playing, gliding blissfully across the dunes and sand. And some won't understand it at all and will turn it off after 20 minutes. That's okay. In the end, it's up to each person who plays Sable to take what they will from it. For me, Sable was about reconnecting with that part of my soul that enjoys adventuring, wandering from place to place and seeing what's out there, making friends along the way, and winding up with a really good story to tell. Thank you for watching. Hey folks, it's me, the Console-Fennec. If you made it this far, I want to say thank you for watching my video. It really does mean a lot to me. If you'd like to leave a comment, feel free to do so. And if you want to see more of my work, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when I post future videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.